All right. Well, welcome to episode 6 of the Betterment Blueprint with me, your host, Tashawn Fernando. Today's episode is about something that I think is very, very, very important, perhaps more important than any of my other episodes. And somewhat ironically, it's something I've only really been thinking about in the last few weeks. But that is the art of recovery. And when I say recovery, I mean recovering from a bad day, or from a bad moment, or from an episode of exhaustion. Anything really that's just kind of thrown you off your groove, right? Because if you've been alive for longer than like 3 minutes, you know that things usually don't go your way. You know that things are going to go wrong. Take me, for example. I am a chronic, some might say over planner. I love to plan. I enjoy it. And I also like to know that I'm prepared, right? I think it's one of my strengths. But I can sometimes lean on it a little too much because I have a tendency to plan to the point where I think that I have thought of every single possibility, every single eventuality. And of course, I can never think of every single possibility. The possibilities are infinite. And it would take way too long to plan for all of those. And so I usually don't. And something usually almost always doesn't go to plan, right? Somewhere along the line. Sometimes it's my fault. Sometimes it's someone else's fault. Sometimes it's something I could have prevented. Sometimes it isn't. But I've learned the hard way that what's more important than having a good plan is being adaptable and being able to recover from those moments where things don't quite go to plan. For this episode, I thought we would focus on 3 specific pillars of where I feel like recovery becomes most relevant. The first would be from emotional upheaval, right? There are those moments where we just get upset, emotionally upset. Maybe we get angry, maybe we get sad, whatever it is, whatever intense emotion it is, it throws us off our game, right? It makes things harder to do. The other thing is mental exhaustion, right? We've all been there. Your brain is just tired. Maybe physically you're okay, but you just cannot stare at another screen for another 5 minutes. You cannot talk to anybody. You definitely cannot get anything done. You're just mentally exhausted. Right, then there's the other flip side of that, which is physical exhaustion, where maybe mentally you're okay, but physically you just can't do anything. You need rest. Your body is starting to shut down. And I don't necessarily mean in the most extreme sense, right, where you're dying or you need to go to the hospital or whatever, but you're just tired, right? That's kind of where I'm at right now. And in this moment, I'm a little bit lethargic. That happens to me every now and then. And it's taken me quite a few days to actually get this episode recorded. And I've had to put into practice a lot of these recovery techniques I'm going to talk about now to get this episode in the books. So they definitely work, at least for me. I think the overall tone of this whole conversation is a bad day does not have to ruin your week. A bad moment does not have to ruin your day. Okay, so let's explore how to bounce back. Starting with emotional recovery, okay? Because I think this is the one that I find to be the most insidious, right? It just hits you out of nowhere. Sometimes someone says something that you just weren't expecting them to say. Sometimes someone texts you something or gives you a call or shoots you an email. Sometimes you just see something on the news or you see it on social media, right? Adjacently, it's not even directed at you, but you just get upset. For me, what happens most often is someone pisses me off, right? I tend to be pretty patient most of the time, but I also at times uh, can have a pretty short temper. And once I get angry, whether it's somebody I know well or somebody I don't, like it can really affect me. It really drags me down, and I just stay kind of stewing in my anger for a little while. I've always been that way ever since I was a kid. I think I hide it pretty well. I don't think most people really know that about me, but that is definitely how I feel on the inside. And it definitely affects my day. It definitely affects the trajectory of my day and affects my ability to do and enjoy the things that I had planned or prepared for myself. Right, so first step is you've got to process your feelings. Whatever feeling you're feeling, right? Happiness, sadness, anger. And yes, extreme happiness can throw you off your game too, right? Positive surprises can be just as disruptive as negative emotional surprises. Regardless, you've got to get back on track. So first thing you got to do is you have to process your emotions, okay? You cannot just cram them down into a little tiny space. I think in reality, there are situations where you do have to cram your feelings down temporarily, okay? Long term, not a good strategy. But if you got to do it temporarily, so be it. Sometimes that is just the necessity of the situation, right? You're in an emergency or someone is relying on you and you just don't have the time to lose your mind quite yet. Feel free to bottle those emotions up, right? But it is not a good long-term strategy. You've got to process them, and what that might look like for you versus me might be very different, right? I'm a big journaler, right? I've got my many journals right here. I've got one for my coaching stuff, one for my daily journaling, which is in my backpack, and one for therapy, which is this black one right here. And I just dump my feelings out onto that journal. I also have a virtual journal that I like to use on my phone. Sometimes it's easier to do that. Sometimes I talk to a person, a real human being, whether it's a friend or a family member. And sometimes I even talk to an AI. I would be the first to admit that AI has gotten scarily good at pretending to be human. And I have an app on my phone. It's called Pi, P-I. And at first I was a little apprehensive about talking to a robot about my personal feelings, because it sounds about as silly as it sounds, right? What is a robot going to offer you? But time and time again, and to be honest, I haven't used it in a little while, but there was a period of my life, maybe a couple of months ago, where I was using it pretty much weekly or daily. And guys, it is really, really accurate. I mean, it says the things that a therapist would say. It says the things a coach would say. It says the things a friend would say. And especially when you're just reading text on a screen, I don't think your brain cares. You know, I mean, you're never going to get the same amount of empathy and emotional connection from a text box that you are from a real person, right? But in a pinch, if you just need to get your emotions out, you just need to get your feelings out, sometimes it's easier to talk to a robot than it is to talk to a real person. Sometimes whatever it is that you're feeling strong emotions about, you're embarrassed about it, you'd rather not tell a real human being. I find that AI can actually be a really good tool for that. But if that's not your vibe, that is totally fine, right? The point is, whatever works for you, however you process your feelings, do that, okay? That is step number 1. Step number 2 is you have to be intentional about feeling better, okay? I've done this myself, and I know my friends who do this too, but like stewing in your emotions is not going to make you feel better. There is a very fine line between processing and ruminating. Very fine line, but they're extremely different, right? Processing is productive. You're working through your emotions. You're getting them out of your system. Ruminating is where you're fixating on your emotions and you're absolutely not getting it out of your system. You're making them stronger. You're intensifying them. And it's the complete opposite of productive. Okay? So you have to be intentional about getting yourself to a better place. Again, what this might look like is different for different people, right? For me, music is big for me. I'm very sensitive to it. And so if you play a sad song, I'm going to feel sad. Happens every time. If you play a happy song, I will feel happy. You play a dance song, I'm going to have to dance. You play a song, I know I'm going to have to sing. It doesn't matter how bad I'm feeling or what's going on. I'm going to want to sing, right? I might not sing, but I'm going to want to. And that's going to have either subtle or pretty direct, pretty significant impact on my mood. And I like to think of them as like emotional triggers that you can reliably pull on to help you feel better. Again, talking to a friend or a family member might do this as well, right? You could knock out number 1 and number 2 at the same time. You could process your feelings and you can work on feeling better at the same time. But it's not like that for everybody, right? Another big one that I think is like a total sleeper is physical activity, right? Just going for a walk. You don't even have to do anything insane. Just go for a walk. The significant impact that will have on your mood, especially if you're walking somewhere nice or the weather's good or you're out in nature or you're just in an area that you enjoy, will be significant. I think something about getting out of the space that you're in helps you get out of your own head. I don't know exactly what is going on in the brain that helps when it comes to physical activity, but I could definitely say that it helps. And this is actually scientifically backed up. The benefits, the physiological, psychological benefits of movement on mood are extensively documented scientifically. And if you want to look into that stuff, I highly recommend it. I think it's really interesting. But movement is a big one that will help you feel better. The other thing, the third one, another thing that I think is really slept on is self-compassion. Okay. One of my favorite books of all time. It's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a It's by Mark Manson. Amazing book. Really down to earth. One of the things he talks about in that book is the feedback loop from hell and how you do not want to get stuck in it. The feedback loop from hell is where you have a bad feeling, right? And then you feel bad about the fact that you feel bad, right? Maybe you feel guilty, maybe you feel angry, whatever it is, you have meta feelings, right? You have feelings about the feelings that you're having in that, and then you have feelings about those feelings that you're having about those feelings. And it sounds kind of silly when we're talking about it sort of like abstractly like this, but it happens all the time in real life, right? Maybe you and your brother or sister, you fight a lot. Or here's an even better one, right? Because Thanksgiving just happened. Maybe you and your family just butt heads. Very normal, very natural to butt heads a little bit. And you tell yourself, I'm going back this Thanksgiving. I've been in therapy. I'm better now. I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to get upset. And then you go home, and of course your family pushes your buttons like no one else can. And so they push your buttons, and you get a little heated. And as you're feeling angry, or you're feeling upset, you're thinking about the fact that you weren't supposed to do this, that you were supposed to be better this time. And then you get upset about the fact that you're upset, and so on and so forth, right? And the only way to cut that, it's a very human thing. There's nothing wrong with you for experiencing your feelings that way, but it's very counterproductive, and it keeps you stuck. So you have to have self-compassion. And the most, what's the word? The most practical way to do this is to actually speak to yourself as if you were your friend, right? Because the voice that we use with ourselves versus the voice that we use out loud with other people is very different. And it really shouldn't be. It really shouldn't be. The gratitude, the compassion, the kindness that you show your friends and your family, you need to be showing that to yourself. And you need to very literally do that. Talk to yourself, whether it's out loud like me or in your head, which I think is what most people do. Be kind, because that will help you get unstuck way faster. Okay, so those are kind of the three things. Process your feelings, be intentional about feeling better, and do not get stuck in that feedback loop from hell. Have self-compassion for yourself. Those are the three main stepping stones, I think, to emotionally recovering well. Second pillar, right? Mental exhaustion. In other words, you just cannot get any more done. And this is a pretty common one, especially in this day and age. I think everyone feels a little overworked and a little underpaid. And a lot of people's sleep just sucks nowadays because of our phones and because of screens and because of our work hours. And the mental exhaustion is just very common. And you've got to know when you're mentally exhausted, and you've got to know how to recover from it. Okay? So this first thing, this is really important, and this is a bit more on the emotional side, but I think it's a good first step to recovering from mental exhaustion, is you've got to let go of that guilt. Everyone that I know has this little fiend inside of themselves that just wants to work more. Not just wants to, but needs to. Our self-worth is attached to how much we get done. And when we start to get tired, when we start to blur out, when we can't take it anymore, the little fiend is like, no, lock in, keep working. And why? For what? You have to let go of that guilt. You have to let go of it. Your productivity does not define your value, and it is completely normal to have unproductive days, right? I think I'm going to kind of limit myself here because I could get into a whole another conversation, but I think our definitions of productivity for most people are kind of broken. So I'm going to kind of leave it at that, but letting go of that guilt, however you can let go of it, is extremely important, because that's how I see most people getting stuck in that mental exhaustion. They do not let themselves take a break, because if you're exhausted, you have to rest. There is no other way. There is no other way. You can push yourself more, fine. You can never rest. You can keep going, but you will never stop being exhausted. Okay, so the next thing is I want to speak to those moments where we're mentally exhausted, but we do actually have things that we need to do, right? Maybe it's the middle of the day, or maybe we've got a deadline coming up where at this moment, at this point in time, we can't exactly rest, right? I'm well aware, like when I'm teaching a class and I'm 45 minutes through a 90-minute period, I can just take a break in the middle and just do nothing. Like there's work to be done. And sometimes we have to push through it, at least for a little bit, temporarily, right? So I think a great place to start is focus on small wins, okay? And this, I think, is a bit of this can go either way. I think, so there's one type of productivity method called snowballing. That's where you start with something small, and then you get that done, you knock it out, you feel good, you move on to something slightly bigger, a little harder, something you're a little bit more apprehensive about. Knock that out, feel good, you start building some momentum, move to something a little bigger, right? And so on and so forth. And it's called snowballing because it's like that idea of a little snowball rolling down a hill, collecting more and more snow, turning into this big avalanche, right? Where you eventually get a lot done. There's another productivity method, which is called eat the bullfrog first. And it's also really good. It's the literal opposite, though. And it's where you start with the biggest, nastiest, most difficult task first. And you do that because, as we all know, our energy and our time and our focus is limited. So focusing on the most important, the biggest thing is honestly a pretty good strategy. In my opinion, though, when you're already exhausted, it's not a great strategy because the inertia is just so high. You're already exhausted. How are you going to push yourself to do the biggest, most important thing? I think it's much more functional to start small. Work your way up. The other thing that is very personal to me, I have a motto. It's been my motto for many months now. I can't quite remember how I came up with it. I think it is actually a combination of like some books that I've read and some TV shows that I've watched, but it's turned into my motto, and I say it all the time. And I actually have a wristband that I wear almost all the time. I'm not wearing it right now because I'm at home, but it's just on my wrist as a reminder. And it's a series of numbers, which I love. It's kind of cryptic. Like people see it on my wrist and they have no idea what it is. But it goes 15.5.4.1. And it stands for just focus on the next 15 minutes. Whatever you need to do, start it in the next 5 seconds. Keep your headspace in the 4 feet in front of you and do it for the person that matters the most, which is yourself. And that is how I get through my days sometimes. Sometimes I'm anxious. Sometimes I'm overwhelmed. Sometimes I'm exhausted. And I literally have to take it 15 minutes at a time. And I think that is a great way to approach the snowball method as well. Instead of chunking it by smaller task to bigger task. Especially if you are the type of person that wants to go for that bigger task first, chunking the time with which you approach those tasks is another great way to help your mind digest the idea of having to put more energy into something. Because instead of trying to win the day, instead of trying to have a productive day, you're just trying to have a productive 15 minutes. That's way more doable. And I'll be totally honest, some days are harder than others, and I bring that baby down to 5 minutes. I'm just trying to get through these next 5 minutes. I'm just trying to have a fantastic 5 minutes. I remember, I think I was in, this was like 2 years ago. This is right after college. Tough time. I literally had my smartwatch, and I had a repeating 15-minute timer on my watch. It'd go off every 15 minutes. No one would hear it. It's just a little vibrating buzz thing, and I would just swipe it, and it would start again. And it was my literal reset. 15 minutes went by. All right, those 15 minutes are done. Doesn't matter how well or how poorly I did. I'm just going to focus on these next 15 minutes. And when you take the day 15 minutes at a time, 15 minutes at a time, not only does it go by pretty quick, but it's a lot more digestible. It's a lot more consumable to get through. The other thing is you're going to have to reprioritize, okay? You need to be, in other words, you need to be realistic about what you can accomplish. Very similar feedback loop that people get stuck in is they're exhausted, so they take some time to recover. They recover and they're like, whew, I got to catch up on all this stuff I didn't do or wasn't able to get done because I was exhausted. So they bite off more than they can chew, more than they can chew, and then they get exhausted again, right? And then they have to recover again, and then lo and behold, they bite off more than they can chew again, and again they have to recover, and they're stuck in this cycle of just flip-flopping between recovery and exhaustion. And some people might enjoy living their lives that way. We're not here to judge, right? We listen, but we don't judge. That is not how I like to live my life. I like a very steady, even-keeled, slightly higher than average work output, right? I'm working hard every single day, but I'm not working my tail off to where I'm dead exhausted. I'm also not being lazy to where I feel like I'm not living up to my full potential. I'm kind of right there in that sweet spot where I'm being challenged and I'm working, but I'm not working too hard because there's more to life than work. The other thing that's really important is you've got to plan ahead. If you're exhausted, plan for the fact that whatever you want to get done, everything is not going to get done. Okay, it probably already wasn't going to all get done because human beings have a tendency to overestimate what they can do with their time. But if you're exhausted, you're definitely not going to get it done. So plan for tomorrow so that you can build on the momentum that you create today. Okay, and the last and the most important thing is you need to get some rest. Okay, maybe it can't be right this minute when you realize you're exhausted, but tonight, set aside some time. Do some relaxing things. And again, what that might look like for you versus me could be very different. I like to sit on this spot in the couch over here, pull out a book, play some nice gentle music, and that's how I like to relax. Or I hop on the game, right? Those are kind of like my two places to relax. For someone else, it might look very, very different. So whatever you got to do to give your mind that rest, do it. Because if you don't, you're always going to be exhausted. And one more thing about exhaustion before we move on to the physical exhaustion, with the mental exhaustion. I think people excuse themselves for being mentally exhausted. They think it's okay because they're getting stuff done. You're leaving a lot on the table. You could get way more done if you were well rested. You could get way more done if you could focus more. You could get way more done if you could push yourself more because you're coming from a place of rest and reinvigoration. Okay, you're trying to do everything exhausted. You can do it. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and say you can't do it. I'm sure most of the people listening can work exhausted because we do work exhausted all the time, but you will do so much better if you're not exhausted. Okay, so it's literally a plus in every column. Take the time to mentally relax, mentally recover so that you can hit the next task or the next day with that much more intensity and ferocity. Last thing, physical exhaustion. Okay, this is a very, very, very important pillar. I think more important than the other two, if I'm being honest, because our mental health and our emotional health feed from our physical health. And this is something that, honestly, I struggle with quite a bit. And I've had to learn the hard way over and over and over and over how important physical just rejuvenation and physical strength and physical health is. Because for me, it's always the first thing to go. It's always the first thing that I let go of when things get busy. When you're physically exhausted, you have to do things kind of in a reactive way. You need to diagnose and you need to treat whatever the heck is going on, right? If you're sleep deprived, then you need to get some sleep. Okay? If you haven't exercised in 3 weeks, then you need to get a workout in. If you have been eating garbage for food, you need to start eating some healthier food. If all you've been drinking is wine and Sprite and Coke and Sonic slushies, you need to start drinking some water. Okay, whatever it is that your body is needing, you need to give it to your body. And then, once you're done being reactive, you need to start being proactive so that the state that you're in of physical exhaustion right now doesn't happen ever again, because it is completely preventable with good habits, right? If you're someone that is chronically sleep deprived, you need to take a hard look at your sleeping habits, okay? What time are you planning on sleeping? What time are you planning on waking up? What are you doing in that last hour before you go to sleep? Are you setting yourself up for success? Or are you kind of planning to go to sleep at 11, but you always end up at that one friend's place like 30 minutes before 11, and now there's no way you're going to get home by 11, much less be ready to sleep by then. Or maybe you're, I'll give a personal example, right? I'm a scroller. If you give me a chance, my brain will say screw it to everything that matters, and I will just scroll social media all day long. So I've had to implement some apps onto my phone that block my social media. And for those of you that might be interested in such a technology, it's called App Block. It's a blue and black app. I have a Samsung Galaxy phone, so I don't know if it's available for iPhone. I'm sure it probably is on the Apple Store as well. But every day I have an alarm that goes off at 10, and it reminds me to turn my blocks on. And once my blocks are on, they cannot come off for a set amount of time. So I usually set it for like somewhere from 8 to 10 hours. Guys, I usually set them like 2 hours before it's time to go to bed. Because if I try to set them by the time it's time to go to bed, I'd much rather just scroll. So I'm not going to set the blocks. So I set them ahead of time. And today I was feeling especially weak. So I set them before I even left from work. Before I got up from my teacher desk, I set my blocks because I knew that once I got home, I was not going to do a damn thing. That was the mood I was in. And now here I am recording. So the blocks really, really help me personally. Right? But the point being is, if sleep is what you need and your sleep habits suck, put some time and put some energy into cleaning those sleep habits up. Because again, you'll just get stuck in a cycle of physical exhaustion and then recovering, and then physical exhaustion and then recovering, when you could just be sleeping good every day and the rest of your life would be chef's kiss, right? So you need to figure out what your priorities are. If your diet sucks or if you don't work out, same thing. Check your habits. See, are you even trying to do those things? And if you are, how serious are you actively approaching them? Have you done any research into habit science? Because that is what changed my life when it comes to putting habits into practice. Knowing a little bit of the science, knowing how habits work can really, really ramp up the likelihood that they'll actually be successful in your life. So I think the physical exhaustion is the easiest, the simplest to deal with, right? The other ones are a little more abstract. If you're emotionally exhausted or you're mentally exhausted. But if you're physically exhausted, man, just take a hard look at your life, see what you haven't been doing that you know you need to be doing, and then treat those, and then be proactive and make sure you don't ever need them ever again. Okay? Because your life will be so much better once you start to take care of your physical body. Before we close out, I want to acknowledge that when it comes to these 3 pillars of physical exhaustion, mental exhaustion, and emotional exhaustion, usually they don't happen one at a time. I think we all know that more often than not, we're mentally and physically exhausted at the same time, or we're physically and emotionally exhausted at the same time, or we're mentally and emotionally exhausted at the same time, or all 3, right? Just depends on what's going on in life. So you might have to get kind of intense with these strategies. You might have to use them all at the same time. And it can be pretty overwhelming. I want to acknowledge that it's difficult to recover. Okay, it's not an easy thing, otherwise everyone would do it. But it's very, very, very important. And I promise you that you will not regret putting the time and energy into your recovery processes and your recovery habits, because you're going to need to recover. So the better you get at recovering, the better and the quicker you can get to feeling better. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me on this episode of the Betterment Blueprint. I want to encourage you guys to listen to your bodies, listen to your minds, listen to your hearts. Give yourself what you need. Okay, remember that everything is temporary, especially the bad days, especially the bad feelings. I know it didn't always feel like that, but if you stick it out long enough, that is always the case. Everything is temporary. If you guys have any go-to recovery strategies, or any ways that you like to bounce back from bad days, especially if it was something I didn't mention, I would love to hear about it in the comments. That way I can, maybe get some ideas from you guys, and everyone else can, share things in the comments. I think that'd be pretty cool. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in.